So Outriders is one of the upcoming games that I've been keeping a pretty close eye on over this past year. It's a third-person RPG looter shooter that's gotten a lot of early comparisons to titles like Destiny, Division, Warframe. The game features 4 classes with unique skills, passives, and playstyles. There'll be plenty of gear to collect as you'll chase certain stats, traits, and rarities, a wide variety of locations to explore, monsters and bosses to fight. There's the scaling difficulty progression via their world tier system. There'll be character customization, and the game has a fully voiced story campaign. Now, the launch of this game was already supposed to have happened by now, but it got pushed back a few times, as has happened and been the case for many games over this past year. Now, it's currently slated for a full release on April the 1st. However, this week we got the release of a demo version of the game. This lets us try all 4 of the game's classes with access to half of their total available skills, and we get to play through the prologue as well as several early main story and side quests, which equates to roughly 3 hours of content. Now, I managed to put about 10 hours into the demo at this point. I've tried 3 of the 4 available classes, getting each of them to the max demo level of 7. On top of that, I did quite a bit of gear grinding just to check out some of the various available mods in the game, the different weapons, and get a better sense of how all of this changes up the feel of combat. And after putting all of this time into the demo, I have to say that my first impressions of the game are that it's okay. I think it's decent and has quite a bit of potential, but there are some pretty big issues that I hope get addressed before the launch of the game. I think the bummer here is that I came into this thing hoping to be blown away. Like, I'm a big fan of the genre. I've put a lot of time into most of the big looter shooters out on the market, and my hope was that I would get hooked after playing the Outriders demo. And again, I definitely intend to check the game out when it comes out, but coming away from my time with this thing, I feel strangely that it's both better and worse than what I expected it to be, and that's kind of what I want to focus on in this video. Talk about the good and the bad of what I saw with Outriders. So let's talk about first off the good. One of the most important things in a game like this is how it feels to play. The combat, I think, is really, really good. First off, I have to say that the gunplay feels great. What does that even mean in a game like this? Well, we're talking about things like the responsiveness of shooting your enemies, the animations that are applied to the weapons that you're firing, and then how the enemies are impacted when they're hit. Those animations, along with the sounds, maybe some subtle screen shaking with big impactful things, play a big role into how gunplay in these games feel. I have to say right off the bat, the sniping and the associated headshots are ultra satisfying, which I guess isn't too surprising because the company making this has also worked in the past on some Gears of War titles. So getting that sniping and headshot to feel good is something I'm sure they were intimately familiar with. I also got a couple of shotguns that I thought felt really good. Specifically, this auto shotgun that I found was wiping the floor with the enemies. I think a lot of the assault rifles and SMGs also had some nice oomph to them. They felt powerful as I shot them and as they impacted the enemies that they were hitting. I think the weapons that I felt were a bit lackluster were specifically the general pistols, but you know, they are pistols, I guess, so that's not too surprising. But the thing about Outriders is that gunplay is only a portion of it. There is clearly a pretty big emphasis on the skills that you use. Now, as I mentioned, the game features 4 different character classes, if you will, and I managed to play 3 of them. The first class that I played was the Pyromancer. This is considered a medium range class that's just all about pyromancy, dealing like fire damage. So the first skill that you have is Heat Wave, where you summon up this fiery wave that deals damage and burns enemies in a path. Then there's Feed the Flames, where you pull the enemy towards you, dealing damage to it, healing yourself and stunning them. And then the final skill that I used was Thermal Bomb. This interrupts and burns the target, and then if they die while this is on them, it will explode for massive damage. Now, the way the heal mechanic works for every class is different. So the heal mechanic for the Pyromancer, anytime an enemy that is marked by one of your abilities dies, you will get some health back. So being the first class that I played, I was still trying to get a handle of the basic combat. I enjoyed the Pyromancer. It was, I think, my second favorite of the 3 of the classes that I've played, but I spent a lot of time doing a lot of the cover shooting and spending more time with my weapons. I think if I went back and spent more time with the Pyromancer, now knowing what I know about how I think you should be approaching combat in this game, I think I would enjoy it a bit more. The next class that I checked out was the Technomancer. This is considered a long-range class that has a big focus on like your arsenal of like turrets and mines and things like that. First ability was the Shrapnel ability, which is this proximity mine that will deal damage and interrupt anyone it hits. There's a cryo turret that inflicts freeze on nearby enemies, and a pain launcher, which is this missile launcher that damages and interrupts all enemies in a path in front of where you place it down. How the healing works for the Technomancer is that you will recover a portion of the damage that you deal as health. You know, initially I thought the Technomancer, being a sort of long-range specialist as they call it, would be my favorite of the three classes that I tried, and it actually was my least favorite. I just didn't really enjoy the abilities and how it felt and flowed in combat. It just felt a little clunky to me. Throwing out that proximity mine and the cryo turret was also a little weird, trying to judge where those things were going to land. Just in general, the kit that I had access to with the Technomancer, I didn't really love it in particular. But the last class that I tried, and I've spent the most time with so far because I've liked it so much, is the Devastator. So this is the kind of in-your-face class, lots of tanky abilities and interruptions. The first skill was Earthquake, where you send out this shockwave in front of you that deals damage and interrupts enemies. Then I have the Golem skill, which for 12 seconds I will take 65% less damage. Really nice to have. And then the final skill that I used was Gravity Leap, where you jump up into the air and then you float there for a minute and you're allowed to pick a target, which you will then like Superman dive towards and dealing a bit of AoE damage and interrupting enemies in a small radius. The healing for the Devastator basically works where if anytime an enemy dies around you, you will recover health. So this really incentivizes being up in the action. And even though the kit of the Devastator is kind of focused on brawling and being up in your face and just constant action, it feels like that's just in general how this game is best played, especially with how sort of janky the cover system is and how it's apparently not the focus, even though it's in the game. We'll talk about that later. But playing the Devastator felt absolutely fantastic. Going into a fight, dropping down some earthquakes to interrupt enemies, finishing them off, healing all the while because I'm close to them using like an SMG or a shotgun or whatever. And then if there's some enemies or snipers in the back or a special boss in the back, I'll use my Gravity Leap, target them, launch towards them, smash them, finish them off maybe with a second earthquake. If things get a little hairy, I would activate my Golem ability where I take that 65% less damage. While I'm in the fray and constantly moving around, I'm healing anytime any of these enemies die. Playing the Devastator, I basically completely ignored the cover system in this game, and that might be part of the reason why I enjoyed this class the most. It was a hell of a good time, and this is really when Outriders clicked for me. And there's also on top of this skill trees, which we basically couldn't touch in the demo. So the skill trees are fairly massive. There's 3 branches for each one of the classes. Each of these branches kind of represent a different focus. Now in the demo, we could only unlock 2 skill points out of way more than 2 that are going to be available in the final game. I mean, you see how big the skill tree is, so only unlocking 2 of these doesn't have us getting to any of those more impactful nodes in the tree. They all appear to be modifiers, little percentage changes like increasing your weapon or ability damage, getting some maybe more life leech, adding more health, or getting damage reduction. Things along those lines are what these trees are focused on. So clearly there's still a lot to figure out here, but when I got a hang of the combat and really started focusing on brawling and constantly being engaged, particularly when I was playing the Devastator, I think it felt great. The gunplay feels good across the board, and getting comfortable with the flow of combat with the skills is where Outriders shines for me. Now, to go along with this, we should talk about the different types of enemies that you're fighting, because there's some interesting and good things here as well. So the game's got your basic set of RPG, looter, shooter enemy varieties. There will be these grunts, these basic enemies that will have like basic rifles or shotguns or whatever. There will be long-range sniper type enemies. There are some melee swarmers who will try to run up to you, hitting you with axes or swords or whatever. And then in the mix, there's also some heavily armored enemies. These ones will be slowly lumbering towards you. They take a bit more to get down. Now, scattered along the way here in each one of these combat encounters, these combat arenas that you go through in Outriders, you'll occasionally come across these mini bosses. Mini bosses will have a much larger health pool than basic enemies, and these health pools will also be broken up into multiple segments, and they have 2 to 3 unique abilities. It's basically like fighting another class, if you will. So the first one of these that I came across in the demo was this Cremator. They had these flamethrowers, and they had the ability to charge charge towards you, as well as do this AoE slam. The next type of these mini bosses that I saw was called Captain Rainer. He had this wandering flame ability, which is basically this fire tornado that would slowly track you, as well as this healing light skill. The next mini boss that I saw was called the Vanguard Captain. It had the ability to enhance his shots with these poison affix. Also had this stone skin, which made him more defensive, and the solar blast, where he launches this ability at you. And then the last of these mini bosses that I came across in the demo was just called Captain, and he had two abilities that I could tell. This vortex that would suck you in towards it once you got close to it, and if you actually got sucked into its center, it would teleport you to another part of the combat arena, as well as he also had the ability to enhance his shots with the poison affix. Now, once I got to the end and I finally unlocked the final world tier, which world tiers just make things progressively harder, but also give you progressively better loot. I got to the cap of world tier 5 and I went back to do more side quests as I was doing my loot grinding, and I noticed that some of the mini bosses had their abilities changed. I went back and did the side mission that has the Captain mini boss, and he went from having that vortex that sucks you in and ports you and those poisonous shots to having brand new abilities. I'm not exactly sure what triggered that difference, but I assume it was the jumping in world tier. So I think that's pretty interesting to note if that is in fact the case. But besides the basic enemies and mini bosses, the game also has straight up boss fights. So these bosses will have these large health pools. They'll have several health segments on their nameplates, and they're set in these arenas. Now, the one boss that we saw in the demo at the end of the intro area, his name was Goss, and he wielded this lightning Tesla type gun and had tons of lightning themed powers. So he had this thing called Discharge Mine, where he would place a mine near your character. He had Shock Shift, which was basically a teleport to take him across the boss arena. He could summon in this ball lightning. Big fan of Magic the Gathering, I see. He could summon in this ball lightning, which would kind of roam around the arena. He had the steel wall skill and also had this channeled ability called Lightning Storm, where a bunch of lightning cracks would spread out and you'd have to try to avoid them. So lots of health and a ton of abilities, whereas the mini bosses appear to have like 2 to 3 abilities. The bosses, what is that, like 5 or 6 abilities? Just from what I saw, he could have had more, but that's what I managed to see. I would say that the enemy variety and some of the things that they could do was pretty interesting. So obviously that, in conjunction with the fact that I think the combat can feel really good, the gunplay and the usage of skills, those are huge pluses in this game's positive category. And then also to go along with this, I think what I've seen of the loot system looks really, really good as well. So they have loot of different rarities. You've got all the sorts of different types of weapons, and there's armor slots as well. But the mod system associated with that is a modifier to your different skills or to the weapons. So it seems like armor mods are going to be giving alterations to your class's abilities. So in some instances, you could get multiple charges of a particular skill. Like for the Pyromancer, I could get multiple charges of my Flame Wave ability. So instead of summoning 1 Flame Wave and it going on cooldown, I could summon 2 or 3 Flame Waves. Pretty awesome. Or you'll get mods that will increase the effectiveness, like the damage, duration, or absorption of any of your skills. You can get mods that will increase the range of your skills, or maybe they add health and armor steal to some of your skills. Now, the weapon mods are kind of more basic from what I could see. The weapon mods will do things like add a freezing, poison, or burning shot. You could get some health regen when you deal damage or kill enemies. Maybe critical strikes won't use up ammo, or you'll get a shield whenever you fire. There's things like piercing shots, ricocheting shots, or shots that apply vulnerability. But those are just for the basic weapons. Like the highest rarity item that I managed to find in this demo were blue items. As you progress up the rarity tier, the mods get more and more interesting, in-depth, and impactful, in particular once you start to get legendary weapons. Now, browsing the Outriders subreddit, I saw quite a few people actually did pick up legendary weapons in the demo. For some reason, after 10 hours of playing, I didn't get a single one, but fine, whatever. Some of the things that I saw on the subreddit, there was this one legendary weapon. It's a pistol called Torment and Agony. Shots with this will mark enemies, and then whenever you reload, it will deal 5 times the weapon's damage to all marked enemies. Then there's the double gun legendary weapon called Amber Vault, where kill shots will increase your damage by 30% for 30 seconds, and this stacks up to 5 times. So it seems like the legendary weapons and those higher tier mods have some pretty significant alterations to these weapons. And what's really cool about the mod system that we couldn't dive into here in the demo, all of these modifiers on the legendary weapons or whatever basic basic weapons, those can be extracted and applied to new things. Now, we didn't get to touch any of this because there was no access to the crafting in the demo. So I think all of those things combined, the fact that the combat feels good, the gunplay, the use of skills, the combination of skills, the modifiers applied to those, and that there are some interesting enemies beyond the basic enemies with the mini bosses and straight up boss fights. These are all pretty big positives for Outriders. These are the things that I really, really liked, and the aspects of the game that are definitely going to have me checking this thing out when it launches. But as I mentioned, there were some pretty rough edges with this thing. So first of all, the game's cover system is just bad. I don't know how else to put it. At first I was like, okay, you know, when they introduce you to it in the tutorial, they're like, you just go up to this thing, you hit the cover button, you snap in a cover, seems fine enough, right? But in practice, as I tried to use the cover system, try to utilize their cover system more and more, I started to realize it didn't work a noticeable portion of the time. I would be right up against a wall, I'd hit the cover button, I'm staring at the wall, I'm not looking at the sky or anything, and it just wouldn't work. Like sometimes my character would jiggle around like it's trying but can't figure out how to get into cover. It sometimes it'd be unresponsive. I'd have to hit the button for cover numerous times and it wouldn't work. On top of that, the mantling doesn't work too well. Sometimes, like going into cover, it just won't respond when you hit the mantle button to climb over something. Also, a lot of what you would assume that you can mantle up onto, you simply can't. Basically, from what I could tell, the only things you can mantle over are the low-lying covers that basically go to waist height. Anything like your chest and above, you can't pull your character up to. It's so weird that the cover system is so bad, but oddly enough, the game doesn't seem to want you to rely on the cover system. As I talked about with how the combat system started to feel a lot better once I wasn't using the cover system as much, it seems like that's what they want you to do, especially you tie into the fact that with all the health regeneration aspects of the different classes, they want you to be engaged in combat. They want you to be in the fray. That seems pretty clear here. And also in some of their promotional material for this game, they've said the line, "Cover is for cowards."
Cover is for cowards.
Which is like, why is it in your game then? If you're telling us we shouldn't be using the cover system, I don't know, I just don't, whatever. So the cover system is bad. Apparently they're saying that you shouldn't even use it. The second check in, I guess the negative category I would say, is I think the graphics look quite a bit dated. It's got this real strong like AA or B game vibe for me, even when set on Ultra. It doesn't look particularly pretty. A lot of the faces, the hair textures, just generally don't love. It just doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look great. In fact, you remember Defiance? It looks like that to me. There's a Defiance nostalgia coming while playing this game. Also, there was no way to disable motion blur, and that was literally making me nauseous at times. It was awful, but apparently they said in the future, you will have the option to get rid of motion blur. Thank you so much. But the visuals, whatever. Game doesn't need great visuals to be a good game. I think maybe the bigger issue that I had from what we saw early on in the demo was just the level design. So the game is basically broken up into what they call a series of hubs and spokes. Basically, in any section of the map, like in any zone, you'll have this main path that's like your main story. There'll be a town, a main path that you follow for that basic story, and then all of these side areas that they call spokes, which are where all of the side quests will take place. And each of these areas are essentially combat arenas. The entire thing, whether you're going through the main story path or any of those side spokes for side quests, it is all incredibly linear. So this is how every single section of the game works. There's going to be an entry point that you go into. You interact with some sort of an object that has you jumping a gap or opening a door or clearing a path, and then you are placed in room number 1. In that room, there tends to be a mix of the basic enemies to fight, and then once you kill the last of the enemies in that room, you'll pick up this item which will allow you to get past the next door or clear the next blockade, which will then place you into room number 2. In that room, there's probably going to be some more basic enemies, and then one of those mini bosses that I talked about to fight. So you get this little boss encounter, and then once you fight the mini boss and you take him out, there'll be a chest for you to interact with, and then a little icon, Outriders icon, will pop up that lets you teleport out, and that's it. That is literally every single like combat arena in this game. There's one room that you phase into, fight enemies, get the thing, go into room number 2, fight enemies, fight the mini boss, teleport out. That's the whole game. When I say it is linear, it is literally like a straight path. Like there'll be some cover here and there. Maybe there'll be 1 or 2 like levels. There is no going behind enemies. It is just literally a straight, every single one of them are straight. It's like one hallway, bendy or not, into another hallway. And that is how the whole game is made up. And again, it's all connected through that main path and then all of those side areas. We can go back and say that this is just the demo, and we only played through the prologue, the tutorial, and then the starting zone with the first initial town, which has NPCs where you can sell stuff to, you pick up quests, and there's also like a shared stash, a matchmaking thing, and then a teleporting flag, which these teleporting flags will be placed throughout the main corridors of this whatever particular zone you happen to be in at the time. And that's how the game is broken up. I have zero issue with like combat arenas in this type of game. In fact, I think it's pretty cool. I just wish they were slightly more interesting, and maybe they will be. And that's the thing, because this is still a demo, maybe the upcoming zones, maybe the different combat arenas will be more than just 1 or 2 rooms, but that's all it was in this demo. That's kind of, I guess, one of the issues, and maybe why a lot of companies don't put out demos, is because it gives a pretty bad first impression. I guess I just have to say, I hope that all of the other zones aren't this simplistic. I know it's all going to be this hub and spoke system because that's what they said it is. That's what they've shown of the game. But hopefully everything gets much larger as you go on. And we do know that there's an end game system that is going to consist of larger areas once you play through the main story. And I'm going to touch on that later on. So the initial level design wasn't great. And I guess I just am keeping my fingers crossed that it gets better as we go throughout. And I think there's a decent chance because this is the intro area after all. Finally, this last part I don't personally care too much about, but I was realizing it didn't seem great as I was watching it, and that's just like the story, the voice acting, all of the cutscenes didn't seem great. I saw a lot of other complaints, but generally I don't care too much about the story in these loot-focused games, so it doesn't bother me that bad. Dialogue did seem a little rough at times, though.
Somehow, I was one of the ones who made it. Don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing here.
One thing that was really bothering me was just how jittery the camera was during all of these cutscenes. It's like whoever was holding the game camera just could not hold the thing still. It was just constantly shaking, very bothersome. I know we just spent several minutes talking about some things that I think are pretty bad, but as I mentioned, most importantly, does the game feel good to play? Does the combat feel good? And as I said, I think it does. The gunplay, the skill usage, how those things can be modified with the weapon and armor mods, all of that, I really started to enjoy the combat the more time I spent with it and the more familiar I got with it, and also the less I used the janky cover system. And I think the boss fights are interesting, mini boss and big boss. So all around, I think this is pretty cool, and I think it has a lot of potential, and I am looking forward to it. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to the end game and all of that stuff, the demo obviously didn't touch any of that. We do know that they're going to have this system of expeditions where once you finish the main story campaign, you unlock this new mode, which are these, they call them big handcrafted levels that are filled with enemies, objectives, and boss fights. All of this is brand new content, nothing that's recycled from the main campaign. There'll be these different challenge tiers, which are different from the world tiers, and they're basically time-based missions that reward bonus loot, and all of this is meant to provide a significant challenge for players. It's going to require good synergy between the various classes, as well as the mods and crafting items that you use. So I'm hopeful that this expedition system is where the real game is, and I just take this base combat, which I enjoy, and I get to spend most of my time there once we play through the main campaign. Even with all of that said, even with the negative aspects, I am looking forward to Outriders, and I hope that the end product is really good. The demo did knock my expectations down a little bit. I'm not as excited as I hoped I would be, because again, I love the genre. I've played a lot of Destiny, Division, Warframe. I haven't played Remnant yet. I should check that out, but I do enjoy these loot-driven shooter games, and I really wanted to come away from playing this demo being super pumped and nothing but excited. But there's definitely some things that I think need some work and hopefully get addressed, or hopefully they're just better later on in the game post the demo content. But that's something we won't find out until the launch about a month from now. So I'm looking forward to it. hopefully it all comes together in the end. Thank you guys for checking this out. I hope you enjoyed the video, the good and the bad of Outriders, what I liked, what I didn't like, and let me know what you think. All right? Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.